but after making 27 films together across 43 years, yeah.
Steven Spielberg and Harrison Ford created movie magic together. From Raiders of the Lost Ark to E.T., they seemed unstoppable. But behind the scenes, a storm was brewing. It started with creative differences, escalated with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and ended in complete silence. Today, we uncover why Spielberg never forgave Ford, and the shocking reason they haven't spoken since. Steven Spielberg was born on December 18, 1946, in Cincinnati, Ohio, into a Jewish family with deep Ukrainian roots. His father, Arnold, was an electrical engineer working on early computers, while his mother, Leah, was a concert pianist who later became a restaurant owner. Both of them came from families of Jewish immigrants who had fled Ukraine, carrying stories of survival that would one day shape Spielberg's films. His childhood was anything but steady. Because of his father's work, the family moved constantly, from Cincinnati to New Jersey and then to Arizona. Every move meant starting over, and being one of the only Jewish kids in mostly non-Jewish neighborhoods made things even harder. He felt embarrassed by his family's Orthodox traditions, and school wasn't any easier. Bullies made sure of that. They called him names, threw pennies at him, and even wrote insults on his locker. Some classmates would sneeze, "How Jew," when they walked past him. It was cruel. He hated standing out. At one point, he even started telling people his last name was German instead of Jewish, just to avoid being targeted. He carried that shame for years, until he grew older and realized it was something to be proud of. Through all of this, there was one thing that made him feel alive: filmmaking. It started when he was 12. He borrowed his father's 8mm camera and made a short Western film called The Last Gunfight to earn a Boy Scout photography badge. It was supposed to be a small project, but something about it clicked. He loved it. He was hooked. By 13, he had made Escape to Nowhere, a 40-minute war film inspired by the World War II stories his father told him. He didn't have fancy equipment, so he got creative, using flour-filled boards to fake explosions. The film ended up winning first place in a statewide competition. It was his first taste of recognition. At 17, he went even bigger. He directed his first feature-length movie, Firelight, a sci-fi story about alien encounters. The budget was a mere $500, but he made it work, using clever tricks like superimposing glowing spaceships onto the film by layering exposures. It was rough, but the ideas were there, themes of mystery, wonder, and broken families. The kind of stories he would later perfect in movies like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He premiered Firelight at a local theater, selling tickets for $1 each. At the end of the night, after selling 500 tickets, he counted the earnings, a total profit of $1. It wasn't much, but to Spielberg, it was proof that people would show up to watch something he had created. Steven Spielberg's journey into Hollywood started with a short film called Amblin, a 26-minute dialogue-free movie he made in 1968. It wasn't just any student film, it was the key that unlocked the doors of Hollywood for him. With a tiny budget of $15,000, Spielberg created a simple yet deeply symbolic story about a young man and woman hitchhiking through the Mojave Desert during the hippie era. The film's quiet, intimate moments slowly reveal a deeper message. While the man seems like a free spirit at first, the contents of his guitar case, items like a tie, deodorant, and toothpaste, show he's not as carefree as he pretends to be. This subtle commentary on identity and societal expectations struck a chord with audiences and critics. What makes Amblin even more fascinating is how Spielberg pulled it off. He was only 21 when he directed it and chose to shoot on 35mm film, a bold and expensive choice for someone just starting out. The film relied entirely on visual storytelling, using expressive cinematography and music instead of dialogue to create an emotional experience. This showed Spielberg's natural talent for telling stories through the camera alone. The impact of Amblin was immediate. Sidney Sheinberg, a top executive at Universal Television, saw the film and was so impressed that he offered Spielberg a 7-year directing contract. At just 22, Spielberg became the youngest filmmaker to sign such a deal with a major studio. The name Amblin stuck with him. Years later, he used it for his production company, Amblin Entertainment, which would go on to create classics like E.T. and Back to the Future. After landing his Universal contract, Spielberg sharpened his skills by directing TV episodes. One of his earliest major gigs was directing Columbo's first episode, Murder by the Book, in 1971. At just 24, he gave the detective series an unforgettable Hitchcock-style treatment, using creative camera angles and suspenseful pacing. The episode became one of the most famous in the series and proved that Spielberg had a talent for turning television into something cinematic. But Spielberg's real breakthrough came later that year with Duel, a made-for-TV movie that became a sensation. Based on a short story by Richard Matheson, Duel is about a traveling salesman who finds himself hunted by a faceless truck driver on a desolate highway. It sounds simple, but Spielberg transformed it into a nerve-wracking thriller. He used low-angle shots to make the truck seem like a looming monster and relied on sound design to build almost unbearable tension. Despite being made for TV, Duel looked and felt like a full-fledged movie, leading to its theatrical release in Europe. The film was a hit, earning Spielberg critical acclaim and cementing his reputation as one of Hollywood's most exciting new directors. Nobody expected a 28-year-old kid named Steven Spielberg to change Hollywood forever. But in 1975, he did exactly that with Jaws. What started as a simple thriller about a killer shark turned into a box office monster that rewrote the rules of filmmaking. Before Jaws, movies didn't have massive nationwide releases, and summer wasn't even considered a good season for movies. That all changed when Spielberg's terrifying Great White Shark hit theaters, becoming the first film to ever make $100 million in the US. It didn't stop there. By the end of its run, Jaws had raked in an unbelievable $470 million worldwide. But here's the crazy part. This film almost didn't work. The mechanical shark was a disaster. It kept breaking down, looking more like a floating bathtub than a bloodthirsty predator. Instead of scrapping the movie, Spielberg made a bold decision. He barely showed the shark at all. Instead, he let the audience feel its presence through suspense and music. That's where John Williams's haunting two-note theme came in. Just two simple notes, dun dun, instantly triggered fear. Spielberg later compared it to Alfred Hitchcock's style, where fear comes from the unknown, not from what's shown on screen. Beyond the scares, what made Jaws a true game-changer was how it was released. Back then, movies didn't launch in hundreds of theaters all at once. Studios would test them in a few cities, then expand if they performed well. Universal flipped the script. They spent a then insane $700,000 on TV ads and blasted Jaws into 409 theaters on the same day. The result? Instant hype. People lined up around the block, and just like that, the summer blockbuster was born. On top of that, the studio cashed in with t-shirts, toys, and even swimming fins. Hollywood had just discovered a gold mine. But Jaws didn't just make money. It changed movies forever. Before this, the hottest films were deep, character-driven stories made by rebellious directors. After Jaws, studios realized that big, exciting, high-concept movies could pull in massive audiences. It marked the beginning of a new Hollywood era, where spectacle mattered just as much as storytelling. The film won 3 Academy Awards, was later preserved in the National Film Registry, and remains one of Spielberg's most legendary works. With Jaws, Spielberg had conquered Hollywood, but he wasn't done yet. 2 years later, he went even bigger, with Aliens. In 1977, he released Close Encounters of the Third Kind, a film that was completely different from other sci-fi movies of the time. While most alien stories played on Cold War fears of invasion, Spielberg took a different route. Instead of terrifying monsters from space, his aliens were mysterious, even peaceful. The story followed Roy Neary, an ordinary guy whose life is turned upside down after he witnesses UFOs. His obsession with them grows, leading him on a journey that questions everything he knows. In a way, it was a reflection of Spielberg himself, a man obsessed with telling stories that made audiences see the world differently. Visually, the film was ahead of its time. Special effects master Douglas Trumbull created breathtaking scenes, including the unforgettable moment when the alien mothership descends, glowing with an otherworldly light. But it wasn't just about the visuals. Spielberg had a genius trick up his sleeve. Instead of having humans and aliens struggle to communicate, he introduced something powerful: music. John Williams composed a simple 5-note melody that served as a universal language between the two species. Just like the 2-note terror of Jaws, this melody became instantly iconic. Beyond the spectacle, the film had real emotional weight. Roy Neary's journey wasn't just about aliens, it was about obsession, discovery, and the unknown. Years later, Spielberg admitted that if he had been a father at the time, he would have written Roy differently, because in the film, Roy leaves his family behind to chase the aliens. That was Spielberg at 30, driven by curiosity. Decades later, as a father himself, he saw things differently. Released in the same year as Star Wars, Close Encounters proved that sci-fi could be both intelligent and wildly successful. It made over $300 million and got Spielberg his first Academy Award nomination for Best Director. The film won an Oscar for its stunning cinematography and set the stage for even greater sci-fi films, especially Spielberg's own E.T. a few years later. Back in 1977, Steven Spielberg and George Lucas were relaxing on a beach in Hawaii. Lucas had just released Star Wars, and Spielberg was dreaming about directing a James Bond movie. But Lucas had something better, an idea for a swashbuckling archaeologist named Indiana Smith. Spielberg liked it, but thought Smith sounded too plain. Let's call him Indiana Jones instead. And just like that, one of Hollywood's greatest heroes was born. With the name settled, the real challenge began, building a story around this adventurous character. Lucas and Spielberg teamed up with screenwriter Lawrence Kasdan to bring Indiana Jones to life. They wanted the film to feel like the classic action serials of the 1930s and 40s, fast-paced, full of danger, and packed with adventure. That's when filmmaker Philip Kaufman suggested the perfect treasure for Indy's first quest, the Ark of the Covenant. By 1980, everything was ready for Raiders of the Lost Ark, except for one major detail: who would play Indiana Jones? The first choice wasn't Harrison Ford, it was Tom Selleck. He even got the role. But just as things were coming together, Selleck had to back out because of his commitment to the TV show Magnum P.I. Suddenly. They needed a new Indy. Spielberg immediately thought of Ford, but Lucas was hesitant. He didn't want Ford to become his go-to guy, after already casting him as Han Solo in Star Wars. But in the end, Ford won the role, promising to make Indy his own, and he delivered. One of Ford's most legendary moments on set happened in Tunisia. The script called for an intense fight scene between Indiana and a master swordsman, but Ford was sick with dysentery and too exhausted for the long choreographed sequence. Frustrated, he turned to Spielberg and asked, "Why don't I just shoot the guy?" Spielberg laughed and agreed. The result? One of the most iconic and hilarious moments in movie history, completely unscripted. From the start, Ford wasn't just playing Indiana Jones. He became him. Spielberg gave him the freedom to shape the character, and that trust paid off. When Raiders of the Lost Ark hit theaters on June 12, 1981, it was an instant sensation. Audiences couldn't get enough. The film made $389 million worldwide, proving that adventure movies were far from dead. Steven Spielberg directed all 4 original Indiana Jones films: Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, The Last Crusade, and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Each film had a different tone. Raiders of the Lost Ark set the blueprint for adventure movies. Temple of Doom was darker, partly because Spielberg and Lucas were both going through rough personal times. Then, The Last Crusade lightened things up, bringing in Indy's father, played by Sean Connery, and shifting the focus to their rocky relationship. Spielberg saw it as a story about fathers and sons, which made it more than just another action film. By the time Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came around, Spielberg wasn't even sure he wanted to do it. He only agreed out of loyalty to Lucas and love for the character. But Indiana Jones wasn't just Spielberg's creation. It was Harrison Ford's, too. At first, Ford wasn't sure about taking the role. He worried Indy might just feel like another version of Han Solo. So he worked with Spielberg and Lucas to make the character different, smarter, more rugged, and, most importantly, human. Ford didn't want Indy to be some untouchable hero. He needed to struggle, get hurt, and think his way out of problems, not just fight his way through them. Ford insisted on playing an aging Indy in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull exactly as he was. Gray hair, wrinkles, everything. He didn't want to pretend Indy hadn't aged. He wanted audiences to see that even older heroes still have adventures left in them. Spielberg trusted Ford completely, even letting him do many of his own stunts. That trust came at a cost. Ford got hurt a lot. In Raiders, a plane ran over his leg, tearing his ACL. In Temple of Doom, he messed up his back so badly he needed surgery, but he refused to let a stunt double take over. The bruises, the limping, that was all real, and it made Indy feel real too. Of course, not everything went smoothly behind the scenes. One of the biggest fights happened during Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. George Lucas was obsessed with the idea of aliens in the story. Ford and Spielberg were not happy. Ford even told Lucas, "No way am I being in a Steven Spielberg movie like that." Spielberg was also hesitant since he had already made E.T. and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. But Lucas wouldn't back down. They compromised by making the aliens part of an ancient legend instead of little green men from outer space. Fans were still divided, but at that point, Spielberg had done his part. He made it feel like an Indiana Jones movie, even if the story was controversial. Meanwhile, Harrison Ford isn't just Indiana Jones or Han Solo. He's also the reason E.T. the Extraterrestrial even happened the way it did. And yet, most people don't even know he played a crucial role behind the scenes. In 1980, Steven Spielberg was in Tunisia, filming Raiders of the Lost Ark. At the same time, he had another story in his head, one about a lost alien and a lonely boy. He knew he wanted to make it, but there was a problem. He didn't have a script. Then, a lucky coincidence. Ford's girlfriend at the time, Melissa Matheson, was on set. She was a talented screenwriter, famous for The Black Stallion. Spielberg saw an opportunity and pitched E.T. to her, hoping she'd write the script. But she turned him down. Screenwriting was exhausting, and she had stepped away from it. Spielberg wasn't one to give up. He turned to Ford and asked for help. Ford, knowing how much Spielberg believed in this story, stepped in. He convinced Matheson to give it another shot. So Spielberg pitched it again, this time with more heart, more emotion. And it worked. Right there, in the Tunisian desert, Matheson changed her mind. That decision led to one of the most famous scripts in Hollywood history. She captured Spielberg's vision perfectly, and her work earned her an Oscar nomination. Without Ford, E.T. might never have been made. But Ford's involvement didn't stop there. He even had a scene in the movie, but you've never seen it. Spielberg cast him as Elliot's school principal. The scene took place after Elliot's frog rescuing stunt in biology class. Ford's character gives Elliot a serious lecture about responsibility, completely unaware that E.T.'s psychic connection is making Elliot levitate in his chair. But here's the twist. Spielberg didn't show Ford's face. He wanted to keep the story from a kid's perspective, where adults were just background noise. And yet, after all that, the scene was cut. Spielberg felt it slowed down the film, so even one of Hollywood's biggest stars couldn't escape the editing room. The footage stayed hidden for years, only surfacing later in special releases. For Henry Thomas, the young actor who played Elliot, meeting Ford on set was unforgettable. In the 1990s, Steven Spielberg was unstoppable. He dominated both special effects and deep, emotional storytelling, proving that a director could master both spectacle and substance. It all started in 1993 with Jurassic Park. Spielberg took a massive risk using computer-generated imagery, CGI, for the first time on this scale. But instead of relying on it completely, he combined CGI with animatronics, making the dinosaurs look real enough to terrify audiences. For example, the T-Rex attack scene was a mix of a 9,000-pound animatronic and CGI, blended so seamlessly that people couldn't tell the difference. Making it wasn't easy because rendering a single frame of the T-Rex in the rain took 6 hours, but it paid off. The movie smashed records, becoming the highest-grossing film ever at the time, and won 3 Oscars for sound and visual effects. Then, just a few months later, Spielberg switched gears completely and released Schindler's List. Instead of CGI and adventure, he told one of the darkest true stories in history. Shot in black and white, the film followed Oskar Schindler, a German businessman who saved over 1,100 Jewish lives during the Holocaust. Spielberg filmed on location in Krakow, Poland, and it wrecked him emotionally. But the result was undeniable. With a budget of just $22 million, it made $322 million worldwide. At the Oscars, it won 7 awards, including Spielberg's first-ever Best Director win. After years of making hits, this was the moment he was finally recognized as one of the greatest filmmakers of all time. By the end of the decade, he returned to war with Saving Private Ryan, 1998. The opening D-Day sequence was so realistic that actual war veterans had flashbacks while watching it. Spielberg used handheld cameras, drained the color, and threw away traditional Hollywood heroics. The film followed Captain John Miller and his squad as they searched for Private James Ryan, the last surviving brother of a fallen family. Inspired by the real-life Nyland brothers, Spielberg made sure everything was accurate, and for that, actors went through brutal boot camp training, and historians were consulted at every stage. The movie was a monster hit, making $482 million worldwide. At the Oscars, Spielberg won Best Director again. Steven Spielberg kicked off the 2000s by diving into science fiction, but not just flashy, futuristic action. He went deep into human emotion. AI artificial intelligence, 2001, wasn't originally his idea. Stanley Kubrick had planned it for years, but thought technology wasn't ready. In 1995, he handed it to Spielberg, and after Kubrick's death in 1999, Spielberg made it his own. The film followed David, an android programmed to love, and questioned what it really meant to be human. Mixing Kubrick's dark vision with his own emotional storytelling, Spielberg created a film that left audiences divided. It made $236 million worldwide, got 2 Oscar nominations, and over time, became recognized as one of his most ambitious projects. Then came Minority Report, 2002, based on Philip K. Dick's novella. It wasn't just another sci-fi flick. It tackled the idea of free will versus fate. In a future where crimes are stopped before they happen, Tom Cruise's character, John Anderton, finds himself accused of a murder he hasn't committed. Yet, Spielberg didn't just make a thrilling chase movie. He brought in scientists to design a believable future. The film made $358 million globally, proving that Spielberg could turn thought-provoking sci-fi into a blockbuster. But he wasn't just about futuristic worlds. He could hit hard with real history, too. Munich, 2005, tackled Israel's secret mission to assassinate those responsible for the 1972 Olympic massacre. Instead of glorifying revenge, Spielberg focused on its toll, on individuals, on morality, on the endless cycle of violence. The film stirred controversy, but earned 5 Oscar nominations. Still, it wasn't a box office hit. making only $131 million worldwide. Years later, Lincoln, 2012, took audiences straight into the 1860s, where Abraham Lincoln fought to end slavery. Instead of a sweeping biography, Spielberg zoomed in on Lincoln's political battles to pass the 13th Amendment. Daniel Day-Lewis transformed into Lincoln so perfectly that he won an Oscar. The film itself got 12 nominations and made over $275 million, proving that a slow, dialogue-heavy drama could still captivate audiences. He wasn't done with history. Bridge of Spies, 2015, brought Cold War tensions to life, focusing on an insurance lawyer, James B. Donovan, who ended up negotiating a spy exchange between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. Written partly by the Coen brothers, the film was sharp, subtle, and intense. It earned 6 Oscar nominations, and Mark Rylance won Best Supporting Actor for his role as a Soviet spy. Then, in 2017, Spielberg turned his attention to journalism with The Post, starring Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks. The film dived into the Pentagon Papers scandal, but it wasn't just about history. It was about power, corruption, and press freedom. Spielberg rushed it into production in 9 months to make sure it came out at a politically relevant moment. It was nominated for Best Picture and made $179 million, proving he still knew how to hit a nerve. Then, just when it seemed like he might stick to serious dramas, Spielberg jumped back into the world of spectacle. Ready Player One, 2018, was a love letter to pop culture, gaming, and adventure. Set in a dystopian future where people escape into virtual reality, the film was packed with references, from The Shining to Back to the Future. Some critics thought it was all flash and no substance, but audiences loved it. It made $607 million worldwide and pushed visual effects to the next level. Then came something personal. The Fabelmans, 2022, was Spielberg telling his own story, his childhood, his love for filmmaking, and his family's struggles. It wasn't a blockbuster, making only $45.6 million, but it hit deep. The film won the People's Choice Award at the Toronto International Film Festival and got 7 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture. It was Spielberg at his most raw and personal, proving that even after decades in Hollywood, he still had stories to tell. Steven Spielberg's personal life has been shaped by 2 marriages, a big family, and a strong commitment to giving back. His first marriage to actress Amy Irving in 1985 didn't last long. They had a son, Max, but divorced in 1989, and Spielberg had to pay a massive $100 million settlement, one of the biggest at the time. A few years later, he met actress Kate Capshaw while making Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom. They got married in 1991, and their relationship has lasted for over 30 years. Their family is huge. Capshaw had 2 kids from previous relationships, Jessica and Theo, whom Spielberg later adopted. Then, they had 4 more children together, Sasha, Sawyer, Michaela, who was adopted, and Destry. At first, Spielberg wasn't sure about being a dad, but after making E.T., he changed his mind. He once said that directing and parenting felt the same. Both were about guiding and shaping something bigger than yourself. No matter how busy he got, family always came first. His wife, Kate, even left acting to focus on their home, calling their marriage a partnership. Spielberg handled the camera and story, while she handled the family. After Schindler's List, Spielberg felt a responsibility to do more than just make movies about history. He wanted to preserve it. In 1994, he created the USC Shoah Foundation to record testimonies from Holocaust survivors. At first, it focused only on those who had lived through the Holocaust, but it later expanded to include survivors of genocides in Rwanda, Armenia, and Cambodia. The foundation has recorded over 56,000 survivor testimonies in 44 languages from 65 countries. Spielberg believes these stories are proof of what hate can do. and he wants them to be a warning to future generations. The foundation also works to fight anti-Semitism and racism today. But that wasn't the only way he gave back. He used his earnings from Schindler's List to start the Righteous Persons Foundation, which has donated over $100 million to Jewish culture and social justice causes. He also created the Wunderkinder Foundation, funding projects in education, healthcare, the arts, and disaster relief. He gave $30 million to help struggling film industry workers get health care, donated heavily to Hurricane Katrina victims, and co-founded the Starlight Children's Foundation to bring joy to sick kids. When Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, Spielberg and his wife donated $1 million for humanitarian aid.